Back in November, Everton were deducted 10 points for breaching the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. Following an appeal, that 10 was reduced to 6. Now, that moves Everton up to 15th from 17th, 5 points clear of the drop as opposed to 1. The appeals board rejected 7 grounds from Everton's legal team, but they decided the independent commission had made legal errors on 2 grounds. They found the commission was wrong to punish Everton for being less than frank over what they told the Premier League about its stadium debt. They also claimed that the commission were wrong in not taking into account available benchmark precedents for financial breaches, which we've seen in the EFL. An example of that, Sheffield Wednesday back in 2020. But Everton are still facing a second charge and could face a second points deduction. Nottingham Forest are facing their own charge and could also face a points deduction. Regards this, Simon, 10-6, and you're right, mate, you did predict this. Is this a win for Everton? Is it about right?
Well, if your starting position, if you lost 10 points, you got it reduced to 6, then it's a win. If your starting position is you want nothing, then it's a loss, and degrees of loss. Everton have lost 6 points, but let's not lose sight of it, for a clear breach of financial fair play. And it isn't just a breach that's 19.5 million. They had 250 million over the limit, and they were able to make allowable adjustments for all kinds of considerations, from COVID losses through to stadium, through to a whole raft of things, and they still came up 20 million over the odds. So of course it's a loss. No one will sit here and say, well, that was wonderful that you got a 6-point penalty because you breached financial fair play. The argument, if you reposition it back on November the 17th, and say, is it a win to go from 10 to 6? Yeah, by definition, if that's your starting point.
Let me put this a different way. There's a narrative running amongst journalists, amongst politicians, that Everton have been hard done by. Are they right?
No, I think they're a victim of their times. I think financial fair play is beginning to be shown to be a blunt instrument that needs sophistication. And the reasons why it's a blunt instrument is no one's been prepared to embrace it properly. Previously, when you got financial fair play sanctions, what was a sanction? Finances. And everyone went, I tell you what, I'll fold that down to my model. And there really was a tacit acceptance that you could find a way around it economically, or the football authorities weren't that interested. Now, for whatever reason, they've gotten interested. Now points are on the table. All of a sudden, everyone's getting a bit more concerned about the ramifications of their failure to run their football club within the confines of the rules. So Everton can consider themselves unlucky, given the timing of the change of direction, in the same way that Manchester City can consider themselves unlucky that Chelsea were able to do whatever they wanted when the Roman Abramovich came through the door, because there was no financial fair play governance, and Manchester City got caught by it 8 years later because there was a preparedness to introduce financial fair play. So I don't think you can... Let's not lose sight of the principles. They are guilty. It's not a case of not guilty. The only thing that the only thing they can have any issue about is the amount of points that they've got. And that is the purpose of an appeal process. If the system didn't work, then you wouldn't have an appeal, and an appeal wouldn't be able to make the kind of decisions that is made now. And when you look at the adjudication, you say, well, first and foremost, it is relatively preposterous that the biggest league in world football has to look at the EFL for its guidelines as to the reasons why it should have a point sanction at one level or another. Right now, there are different rules, in the same way there's different rules in the Premier League for transfers, the same way there's different rules in the Premier League for other methods of operation that are different to the EFL. But all of a sudden, the EFL now needs to be the blueprint for your precedent of what you should be giving points. They are different rules. But I would suggest that it would have been appropriate for them to have had some understanding of what goes on elsewhere in the industry before they start flinging around 10-point sanctions.
Right.
The second thing is you cannot eliminate subjectivity from any form of adjudication. If you go in front of a jury, you are subjected to the opinions of a jury. If you go in front of a judge, when the craze went in front of Judge Milford Stevenson in the 1960s, he decided to give a sentence that had never been seen before in British law, because British society was demanding a crackdown on the behaviour of these individuals because they were all over the front page of the newspapers. So subjectivity came into the decision-making process in the real world. These guys have interpreted Everton's representations, and if you read some of the representations that they made, it's moronic. I mean, you've got moronic observations in there. You've got Mashiri suggesting the reasons why they should have been able to spend money is because they're lacking strength in their midfield. That's one of the reasons why they should be able to overcome financial fair play by buying more players and not be adjudicated under that auspice. So they are stupid and their representations were poor. But the subjectivity has now been corrected because another set of eyes have gone,
Right.
well, you've leapt to the conclusion that you think Everton were pulling your chain and not telling the truth and they were less than frank. We don't see that quite as much, so we're going to take that one off the table. But don't forget that Everton advanced 9 questions. They advised no changing of evidence, no changing of circumstance. The same things changed. They just wanted to advance a different way of looking at it. Out of the 9, 80% of them they got kicked back on. So on an 80-20, so all they had to do, all the QC had to do, or KC, sorry, all the KC had to do was create reasonable doubt around a couple of areas, and they were going to get a reduction, and that's what he's done.
Right. Before Stephen Boston
guilty.
joins us, what else is on the horizon? In your eyes, Everton fans listening this morning are beginning, I think, to get to grips with this. All right, we've got to live with 6. We've got to live with that. That's the reality of it. But what else is coming down the pipe?
Well, again, it's interesting to see the argument's going to be made that if the next, again, because they are a recidivist, they have offended again. If you get nicked for burglary and you go in front of the beak, he gives you 5 years, and the first thing you do when you come out of prison is go and do another burglary, you go in front of the beak, he goes, have I seen you before? Right? You're going to get a bigger sentence for that now because you're a recidivist. So there's an argument for that. The other argument is that Everton will say is, hang on a second, the way this is structured is that 2 years of that offence has already been catered for in the last penalty, so we're only really contending with 1 further year of offence because we've already been judged for 2 years of a 3-year cycle. But if you guys don't want these bloody rules, then change them.
Right.
You are the clubs that make up the constituency of the Premier League. If you want to change the way financial fair play is assessed, you put forward a motion, and the central management of the Premier League puts it to a vote. You wanted 3-year cycles. You accepted 3-year cycles. And now that financial fair play has gone, right, enough fiddling about now, lads. You're going to start getting some consequences. All of a sudden, out comes the legal profession that makes a cottage industry out of football now. Nick DeMarco must be sitting there with a cash register going, where's my next opportunity to get some money out of football? Right?
Okay.
Because of the construction of stupid rules.
Common wisdom seems to suggest it's going to be 2 points that are going to get next. But we'll see. Maybe. What might Forest get hit with? What might come down Chelsea's way sooner than later? And of course, what is going to happen with Manchester City much further down the line? But there's a lot more to unpack regards Everton.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.